Okay, it's been a long day, but now comes the fun. I know we've been listening to lots and lots of programs, but this is where the fun starts. There's two bits of fun. The second bit of fun is at the pub, and I know that, but we all know about that sort of fun, but it's playing pieces that you love at the Mason's Arms at 7 o'clock, from 7 o'clock, food and drink, and I hope a good time. But before that, the third of our 4 plenary sessions for this IFC, the 38th IFC London 2012, and it's a man whom I've very, very, very long wanted to meet. I've heard his programs, I've admired his programs like few others, and he's come all the way from New York, and that's some achievement, particularly with the immigration problems they're having at Heathrow at the moment. But anyway, without any further ado, let me introduce David Isay.
Hi, it's great to be here. It's been about 15 years since I was at an IFC, and it's nice to come home. I was actually preparing yesterday, and about 5 minutes before my taxi was coming to take me to the airport, I remembered transcripts, and I put it together really fast. So you have transcripts of the radio stuff I'm going to play. I'm going to play a bunch of stories, and I'm happy to answer questions, talk for about an hour about radio documentaries, StoryCorps. Who here, have people heard of StoryCorps? Can you raise your hand if you've heard of it? Okay, and who hasn't heard of it? Okay, all right, there you go. So when I was here 15 years ago last, I was a radio documentary or feature maker. And I think that the last thing I ever played in an IFC is what I'm going to start by playing today, which is a brief excerpt from a documentary that I did 15 years ago. And this is a piece that I have not played in a long time. It's called The Sunshine Hotel. And it's a documentary that I did on the Bowery in New York City. The Bowery in the 30s and 40s and 20s in New York City it's a mile-long strip of, it's a mile-long street where all the homeless people in the country went to. It was kind of the mecca of homelessness, and the street was lined with flop houses, which are hotels that men lived in for 10 cents a night, and liquor stores and employment agencies. And over the years, the Bowery now, folks know, is part of basically NYU and is incredibly gentrified, and nothing exists anymore. But when I did this documentary 15 years ago, there were still a couple of flop houses that had been kind of frozen in time from the 40s and 30s and turn of the century. They had kind of lasted because of strange rules having to do with tenancy. And inside these houses, people lived for $5 a night inside these hotels. They lived in little little prison cell-sized cubicles with chicken wire over the top so that you couldn't hop from one cubicle to the next. And when I used to do radio documentaries, I ran something called Sound Portraits. That was the name of the documentary company I ran. And our mission was to kind of shine a light on places you didn't normally get to visit. And I thought that was a wonderful use of radio in the way that I like to use radio. So this was an example of that. And this is an excerpt of the Sunshine Hotel. There's a guy named Nathan Smith, who was the manager of the hotel, who narrated the thing. And you're going to hear a couple of different excerpts. I think it's 5 or 6 minutes long, and you can follow along on the transcript. But if you can understand the English, close your eyes and kind of take yourself to the Sunshine Hotel. And here we go. If you could play that for me, Brandon, thanks.
Welcome, come on in. If you got the rent money, you can stay. If you ain't, beat it. This is an eat it and beat it hotel. Normally people come in, they stay for a day or two and get out. But for some reason or another, people come in, they like to stay for a year, 2 years. It's a nice place if you're short of funds and you need to lay your head down for a couple of hours. We hope to make your stay pleasant. But don't ask me for towels or soap. We don't have it. We do not have those luxuries. You check it out?
Yeah, I didn't like the fleas in the bed.
Fleas?
Yeah, I had fleas. I scratched all night the whole time I was here. Yeah, roaches on the wall. I mean, the last
We're
time
not
I
a
did the
luxury
wall,
hotel.
there were roaches all
We're
over
a
the
street
wall
hotel.
every
In
day.
other words, a place where you want to lay your head for a couple of hours or a couple of days, without anybody bothering you.
You want to see ID of any kind?
No, I believe you. I mean, this is the kind of hotel where everybody gives an AKA. You're welcome to a room for a very nominal fee. Okay, here are my friend. You're all set.
Thanks a lot, buddy.
Okay, you can square yourself away, this, that, and the other. This is the last of the last. Well, welcome to the Sunshine Hotel.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, the last of the last. Take it easy.
I'm Henry, by the way.
Henry and Nathan.
How you doing,
Okay,
Nathan?
my friend.
Pleased to meet you.
Okay. What's up, God? What's happening? All right, my man. My name is Nathan Smith, and I am the manager of the Sunshine Hotel. Yeah, what can I do for you?
I'd like to pay my...
What happened? This is Vinny here. What? Vinny Gigante, cubicle 25A. Vinny has throat cancer and talks with a voice box. Yeah, that's Vinny,
This is the manager, he's the best guy here, bro. I've been here 7 years, this man's like my adopted father, and he'll tell you,
Vinny looks a lot like the famous mob boss Vincent the Chin Gigante. Rumor has it that the guy's his uncle, although I don't know.
I came here because I was addicted to heroin. I didn't want to bother my family anymore, so I've been here since then, and I will be here until I die, probably.
That chirping sound you hear is Vinny's two lovebirds. He spends all day in his cubicle taking care of.
This is Pretty Boy. He's 10 years old. This is Little Bit. He's 5. He's a devil. Yes, you are. They take good care of each other. If it wasn't for these birds, I don't think I'd have made it in this place. These birds have been my life. So many people don't realize you need something, to help you through everything, or you're not gonna make it.
Hey, Pop. Tell me something slick, Anthony. Tell me what's going on. Anthony Coppola, cubicle 4B. Everyone here calls him Fat Anthony because he weighs 425 pounds.
Sometimes I knock off a 26-ounce can of Chef Boyardee ravioli. That is for 5 people in the family. And I'll be eating it cold right out of the can. That is a load of eats. That's a lot of grub there.
Anthony's an orphan who came to the Bowery as a teenager about 20 years ago. When I first met Anthony, he was a normal-sized person. But something about this place caused him to eat and eat and eat. Anthony's gotten so large he doesn't fit in his clothes anymore. He just walks around the hotel wrapped in a sheet and almost never leaves the building.
Why should I go anywhere? If I want air, I just open up the window, turn on my fan a little higher, and I got air. Excuse me.
I've been trying to get Anthony to move to a hospital, but he won't go.
I don't want to leave, not yet. Too much like home. Too much like home. You've been in a place for such a long time. People get to be like family. You don't want to leave. Let this young fella in. This is my lunch.
Little light snack.
That's Bruce, the hotel's runner, delivering 2 bags of Chinese food to Fat Anthony. That's another part of life in these old hotels. You see, up here in the Sunshine, we're totally isolated from the rest of the world, so we create our own little society. Anything you want, you can get from another tenant. We have a loan shark, a drug dealer, a guy who does other tenants' laundry for a couple of bucks, a room cleaner,
All right, thank you.
and Bruce, who runs errands for tips.
Yeah, that's all. What's for my dinner?
All day, Bruce sits in the lobby waiting for runs.
Bruce!
And as soon as somebody calls him, then boom, he hops into action.
Okay, T2 sugars, 1 Rolade, 2 packs Monarch non-filter, large Bacitracin, 1 pack ginseng, 2 packs Anacin. There you go.
T2 sugars, Rolade.
Bruce is a Vietnam vet, and for him, running errands is kind of like going into battle.
It takes constant concentration, constant alertness. The main thing is do the steps. Get the order. Remember who gave you the money, and remember how much they gave you.
11 should cover it, right?
Okay. It's a work of constant steps, and most of them are mental. T2 sugars, 1 Rolade, 2 packs of Monarch. And walking all the time, you've got people constantly distracting you. Distraction's your biggest enemy.
All I need is a tea with 2 sugars.
You get to the store.
Yeah, tea with 2 sugars.
You get to the store, you got to realize that you've got to constantly be on guard. Constantly be on guard. You're in the hustler's capital of the planet. Every third person you meet is trying to hustle you out of your money. Store clerks included.
How much is the Rolex?
75.
Okay, I gave you $1. Now you gave me.
I give you 50 cents buy. I'm the
You run into every kind of person that's out for money in the world out there. And you got other people's money on you. You've got to defend it better than you would your own. Because that's your livelihood. You blow it once, you could ruin your career. you don't blow it once.
Check and make sure everything's all right. My reputation is my business. I don't blow it. I don't blow it. 37, $1.37 and change.
Okay.
Okay.
Keep that.
So I wanted to play that. Oh, thank you. I wanted to play that clip today, both because it's, I think, the last thing I played in an IFC, and also because it had some influence, along with many other documentaries that I did over the years in starting this crazy project that I started about 9 years ago called StoryCorps. After I did this documentary, I ended up doing a book on the hotels. I remember when I took the galleys, which is a pre-publication manuscript with photographs, it was photographs and oral histories, into the Sunshine Hotel. And I should say that everybody in the Sunshine Hotel documentary died within 5 years after this was broadcast, except Bruce, the runner, who's still alive, and you still see him on the streets doing runs for various people. But everybody else is gone, and there were probably 30 characters in the full documentary. But I remember when I did this, I brought this galley into the Sunshine Hotel, and I showed it to one of the guys whose story was in the book, nobody whose voice you heard here. He took the book and he looked at his photograph in the story, and he grabbed it away from me, and he started running down the hall holding the book over his head, screaming at the top of his lungs, "I exist, I exist." That became sort of a clarion call for me on starting StoryCorps, which is this very simple idea that we launched in Grand Central Terminal in New York City 8.5 years ago, and which I've since devoted my life to hopefully growing into an American institution. Simple idea. We put a booth in Grand Central Terminal where you bring anyone who you want to honor by listening to their story. It could be a parent, could be a grandparent, could be a friend, could be the person who you've sat in a diner, like ordering eggs next to for the last 20 years. You go there, you're met by a facilitator who works for StoryCorps, who brings you inside of this booth. The booth is designed as this kind of sacred space. The lights are low. You go inside, it's a sound booth. You sit across from, say, your grandmother for 40 minutes, a facilitator's in a corner with 2 CD burners, and you have a conversation. Most people think of it as, if I had 40 minutes left to live, what would I say to this person who means so much to me? At the end of the 40 minutes, 2 CDs have been burned. One stays with your family, and the other goes to the Library of Congress in the United States, which is the big national library in Washington, D.C., so your great-great-great-great-grandkids can someday get to know your grandmother through her voice and story. And I really started it as and it still today exists as kind of a social service. For me, I did a documentary many years ago, which I played at IFC 20 years ago, with 2 kids growing up in a housing project in Chicago, where I gave them tape recorders and had them document their lives for a week. And that was a big kind of turning point moment for me when I saw and in the U.S., this was, I think, the first nationally broadcast kind of give people microphones and let them do their own documentary. And I saw the power of the microphone. When one of these kids would climb into bed with his grandmother and interview her, the microphone gave him the license to have conversations that he'd never had before. And those conversations would continue long after the microphone was turned off. And then when everybody in that documentary as well died, I guess my documentaries are kind of the kiss of death, that when everybody in that documentary died, these kids who are now men, the only record they had of their loved ones' lives were these tapes. So that was also kind of a big influence on starting StoryCorps, which again, when I started it, was a social service. It's the chance for people to be in a quiet space with a loved one and have a conversation, using the license of having a microphone to talk about things you don't normally get to talk about, and to leave this record for future generations. We've done now about 40,000 interviews with about 80,000 people across the country, so it's, I think, the largest collection of human voices ever put together. And I didn't know there would be a broadcast component. I thought that we would get stories for several months, but again, because this is an experiment, I thought there were a finite number of stories you could get between a grandparent and a grandkid. Eventually they would start to repeat, and this would just exist as this service to people. And one of the many kind of exciting, miraculous things about StoryCorps is that the stories have continued to come out of StoryCorps. We broadcast them every Friday on National Public Radio in the U.S., and we have animations, which I'll show you now, and we put out books. And the stories just seem to get better as time goes on. So I'm going to play you a bunch of StoryCorps stories, and we'll hear it. It's to me, these stories are kind of just poems that run every week on public radio. Again, two sides to StoryCorps: access to the experience, where you have this experience with a loved one. And I think the power of that experience is that it tells people that they matter and won't be forgotten. We do a lot of outreach in the U.S. to people who might not have heard of us through public radio, so half of our slots are held for people who might be, homeless or immigrants, people who hadn't heard of us on public radio, which is a wonderful service, but is largely heard by, white upper middle class people. So 50% of the slots are filled through outreach, which gives us a full swath of American voices. And then there's the broadcast side, which I hope people are going to be walking in the footsteps of someone who, just by definition, is going to be very different than them, and recognize a little bit of themselves in this other person, and recognize all those good things that all of us believe. The power of listening and the fact that we all share more in common than one would think from watching 24-hour news and so forth. So I'm going to take you to the very beginning of StoryCorps. This is in Grand Central Terminal, and this is a couple who came to the booth within the first month of when StoryCorps opened. His name was Danny Perasa. These are thick Brooklyn accents, so you may want to follow along on your scripts. Annie, his wife, is a nurse, and Danny and Annie came to StoryCorps to tell the story of their first date that had happened 25 years before. So this is Danny Perasa and Annie Perasa in StoryCorps, probably within the first 30 days after we opened up. And if you could play that.
She started to talk, and I said, listen, I'm going to deliver a speech. I said, at the end, you're going to want to go home. I said, you represent a 34-letter word. I said, that word is love. I said, if we're going anywhere, we're going down the aisle because I'm too tired, too sick, and too sore to do any other damn thing. And she turned around and she said, well, of course I'll marry you. And the next morning I called her as early as I possibly could.
And he always gets up early.
to make sure she hadn't changed her mind. And she hadn't. And every year on April 22nd around 3 o'clock, I call her and ask her if it was today, would she do it again? And so far the answer's been the same.
Yeah, 25 times yes.
You see, the thing of it is, I always feel guilty when I say I love you to you, and I say it so often. I say it to remind you that as dumpy as I am, it's coming from me. It's like hearing a beautiful song from a busted old radio. And it's nice of you to keep the radio around the house.
If I don't have a note on the kitchen table, I think there's something wrong. You write a love letter to me every morning.
The only thing that could possibly be wrong is I couldn't find a silly pen.
To my princess, the weather out today is extremely rainy. I'll call you at 11:20 in the morning.
It's a romantic weather report.
And I love you, I love you, I love you.
When a guy is happily married, no matter what happens at work, no matter what happens in the rest of the day, there's a shelter when you get home. There's a knowledge, knowing that you can hug somebody without them throwing you downstairs and saying, get your hands off me. And being married is like having a color television set. You never want to go back to black and white.
So Danny and Annie were kind of personified very early on what StoryCorps stands for, which is the kind of eloquence and poetry and grace you can find in the stories of everyday people when you take the time to listen. Danny and Annie came back to StoryCorps over and over and over again. In the very early days of StoryCorps, it was hard to fill reservations. I mean, now when I was in Los Angeles a couple weeks ago, and we have these mobile traveling booths that travel the United States. And someone raised their hand and said, I made a reservation 3 seconds after reservations opened for StoryCorps here in Los Angeles, and I was number 1,800 on the waiting list. So there's an incredible demand in the United States for this now. In the very beginning, though, nobody really wanted to do it, except Danny and Annie, who came over and over again. And they read love letters to each other. Danny ended up bringing every character he'd ever met, baseball, major league umpires, and undercover narcotics detectives. And it got to the point where Danny would, have a cataract operation. He'd say, okay, I have a cataract operation on Monday. Do you need me to come in next week and document it? And we'd say, sure, whatever, come on in. So he came over and over and over again. And Danny was madly in love with Annie, and was, to me, one of the great romantics I've ever met. He was not someone you would necessarily think was so. If you saw him walking down the street, he was about 5 feet tall and he was bald. He had one snaggle tooth and crossed eyes. But to me, and I think you'll hear in this next piece, he had more romance in his little pinky than all of Hollywood's leading men put together. Danny got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 4 or 5 years after that first interview. And he got, as many of you probably know, pancreatic cancer is a devastating and fast-moving disease. And we dedicated our Grand Central booth and renamed it the Danny and Annie Peraza booth about a week after his diagnosis. And the week after that, he was too sick to get to the booth, but asked us to come to his house and record a final interview between he and Annie. So this is that interview. Danny is laying on a couch. Annie is sitting on a chair beside him. And this is the conversation that they had in their home in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn.
The illness is not hard on me. It's just, the finality of it. And him, he goes along like a trooper.
Listen, even downhill, a car doesn't roll unless it's pushed, and you're giving me a great push. The deal of it is, we try to give each other hope, and not hope that I'll live, hope that she'll do well after I pass, hope that people will support her, hope that if she meets somebody and likes him, she marries him.
He has everything planned,
I'm working on it. She said it was her call. She wants to walk out behind the casket alone. I guess that's the way to do it, because when we were married, you know how your brother takes you down, your father takes you down? She said, well, I don't know which of my brothers to walk in with. I don't want to offend anybody. I said, I got a solution. I said, you walk in with me, you walk out with me. And the other day, I said, who's going to walk down the aisle with you behind the casket? To support her. And she said, nobody. I walked in with you alone. I'm walking out with you alone.
Mm-hmm.
There's a thing in life where you have to come to terms with dying. Well, I haven't come to terms with dying yet. I want to come to terms with being sure that you understand that my love for you up to this point was as much as it could be, and it'll be as much as it could be for eternity. I always said the only thing I have to give you is a poor gift, and it's myself. And I always gave it. And if there's a way to come back and give it, I'll do that too. Do you have the Valentine's Day letter there?
Yeah. My dearest wife, this is a very special day. It is a day on which we share our love, which still grows after all these years. Now that love is being used by us to sustain us through these hard times. All my love, all my days, and more. Happy Valentine's Day.
I could write on and on about her. She lights up the room in the morning when she tells me to put both hands on her shoulders so she can support me. She lights up my life when she says to me at night, wouldn't you like a little ice cream? Or would you please drink more water? I mean, those aren't very romantic things to say, but they stir my heart. In my mind, in my heart, there has never been, there is not now, and never will be another Annie.